welcome everyone to the first ever Youth Climate Panel hosted by Pam Damoff's Youth Council. It's great to see so many people here. We're really excited at the attendance because I know I can speak on behalf of the whole Youth Council when I say we put a lot of effort into this, and we're really excited to see it pay off. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I'm first going to do the land acknowledgement. Oh, second here. The thing's blocking my view. Just gotta move that. All right. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions on many First Nations and the Métis, from the Anishinaabe to the Attawadron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. So just a reminder to everyone that this meeting is being recorded so that it can be sent to local media. So if you don't want your face on it, you're free to just turn your camera off. This isn't school, you don't have to have your camera on. All right, so here's the agenda. It's pretty simple. Just gonna do an introduction. I shouldn't take too long. I wanna save as much time as we can for questions. I know we have a lot of great panelists and a lot of great questions. So from there, we'll go into questions. That should take roughly an hour. Then if there's time, we'll do some Q&A questions that you will submit through Google Form. That should be posted in the chat pretty soon. And then we'll go into the conclusion. So without any further ado, here are your panelists. So we have Pam Damoff, who is the Canadian Liberal MP representing Oakville, North Burlington. She grew up in London, Ontario, and now resides in Oakville. She is a co-founder of Cycle Oakville to promote cycling and improve cycling infrastructure, and received the 2013 Bicycling Leadership Award for her promotion of cycling in Ontario. She is a strong advocate for the environment and supporter of the Climate Action Incentive. And fun fact, she's a huge Terry Fox fan and an avid cyclist. Alanna Bodo, she is currently a PhD candidate and has spent the past 4 years studying the effects of climate change on forests in Southern Ontario. Alanna grew up in Oakville and attended the University of British Columbia and Western University before settling at McMaster University for her PhD. So her work today, Alanna studies the exchange of water between forests and the atmosphere, as well as predicting future implications due to climate change. And in addition to her research, Alanna works as a coordinator for the McMaster Center for Climate Change and enjoys taking part in high school and community outreach. Next, we have Tabassum Wyne. She's a social entrepreneur and an advocate for Canadian Muslims. She currently located in Milton. She served on the McMaster Children's Hospital Family Advisory Council, as well as the Community Leadership Committee for the We Make Milton Official Apology Plan project, ensuring underrepresented voices are taken into consideration. And she strives to advocate to create a more equitable society for all. Fun fact, she loves to cook and competed on the Wall of Chefs on Food Network Canada. Next, we have Lorraine Green and Carole Holmes from GASP. They're prominent local climate advocates, activists, and advocates for the common good, a sustainable world. They're currently located in Oakville, and they founded a grassroots, nonpartisan environment group dedicated to climate action and advocacy for the world's grandchildren. Their work has focused on speaking to MPs about their concerns about the environment, letter campaigns, old-fashioned calling, petitions, strikes, and more. Fun fact, they want to model themselves off of their Indigenous grandmother sisters. All right, so now we'll get into the general questions. I will stop presenting my screen now. So let me just get out of there. So basically how it's going to work is I will ask a general question, and then which will be answered by all the panelists, who will then be asked by the MCs one of their specific questions. We'll go through all the panelists, then start back up at the second general question, go down to the second question for panelists. So let's begin. The first general question, we'll start with Alanna, then Tabassum, then Pam, and then Lorraine and Carole. So the first question is, what do you think in your life has formed your perspective on climate? Alanna, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Luca. And great question. So I've always, since I can remember, have been passionate about environmental issues. But I think it was really in grade 10, I had my science teacher at Holy Trinity High School, and she started the first environmental club. And I was in that group, and it was just really empowering being part of a group of my peers that were also passionate about the environment. And really from there, it's just shaped my education, which has really been the key player in my perspective on climate. And having the privilege to collect climate data and analyze climate data, I really get to see firsthand the impacts that we have on the climate, on climate change, but also the consequences from climate change here in Ontario.
Perfect. Now, Matej, we'll ask your specific question.
So this is a question to Ms. Bodo. So first is, a lot of climate action is focused on individual actions. Do you think that our individual actions are enough to curb emissions, or do you think industry has the most important role to play?
That's a great question as well. So I do think industry has a very large role to play. And until these key players make some changes, we might not see as much progress as against the fight or in the fight against climate change as we could. However, I do think individual actions are incredibly important to propel this change in larger industries. So remember that like large companies rely on consumers to meet their bottom line. And so if consumers become more empowered to make these changes for the better, they may start demanding these changes from the companies that they buy from. And one of the ways, or this is one of the ways that the actions of people like you and I can make a difference at larger scales. And additionally, I mentioned before, or I will mention, sorry, here in Ontario, the largest sector that contributes to greenhouse gases is transportation. So this just shows that our individual actions, particularly related to how we get to school and to work, these can directly impact emissions at the provincial level.
Great, thank you so much for that awesome answer. Now I'll move on to Tabassum. So I'll give you the general question again, is what do you think in your life has formed your perspective on climate?
Thank you so much, Luca. Thank you so much, MP Pam Damoff, for having me today. So I believe that my faith has impacted my perspective on climate. I believe that as Muslims, we're stewards of our surroundings and that each of our individual actions have impact on the climate. To live a life according to Islamic principles means letting go of any extravagance and living harmoniously with everything that surrounds us, as well as showing compassion towards all other elements of nature.
Thank you so much. We'll now move on to Mariana, who will ask your specific question.
Ms. Tabassum, what has been your biggest challenge that you faced as a community advocate?
Thank you, Mariana. I think the biggest challenge that I faced as a community advocate is perhaps focusing on a few issues like health equity, human rights in the education system, Islamophobia, and in turn, unintentionally putting on blinders to areas such as climate change. I'm reminded that my faith, Islam, teaches us moderation. So I'm humbled to be here today to learn from climate activists and the youth on this important matter. This opportunity has allowed me to do a lot of research about what our holy book says and about the principles of unity, balance, and responsibility towards our planet. Muslims believe that humans should act as guardians of the planet and that we will be held accountable by God for our actions. So this concept of stewardship is a powerful one and a much needed reminder for myself. And I want to say a quick thank you to my niece, Eliza, for the invite today. Thank you, Eliza.
Great answer. So we'll now move on to MP Pam Damoff. So Pam, the first general question is, what do you think in your life has formed your perspective on climate?
Well, thank you, Luca. And before I answer, I have to take a second to just say a thank you to my youth council. These are students that have come together. Some of them have been on for a few years and take a project on every year. And this year, this is what they've done. And I can't thank them enough. And also a huge thank you to Charmaine from my office, who has been the mentor, assisting in the background to the youth council. So I just want to thank them. And also, Luca, if I could, I see that we have Oakville Town Councillor Pavan Parmer here. So I just wanted to say hi to Pav and thank you for joining us today. So, I think probably the biggest influence on everything I've done in my life has been my son, and trying to make the world better for him. And I'm going to be a grandmother in June, so I can join GASP officially, I guess. But just trying to make the world a better place. And I think, seeing Pav here, I think my experience on town council shaped a lot of my opinions as well. Trying to preserve the urban forest, fighting for cycling infrastructure. I mean, I've ridden a bike since I can remember. When I moved to Ottawa to work, that was the first thing I did. And it just, not only is it a great way to move, like it was my transportation, but it also brought me so much joy. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's just mainly my son and trying to make sure that the world is a better place for him and that we're leaving it in a better way than we found it. Thanks, Luca.
Great, thank you so much, Pam, for that great answer. We'll now go to Zoe, who will ask you your specific question.
Ms. Damoff, do you think that the fear of public opinion and losing voters plays too large of a role in the foundation of climate policy?
Thanks, Zoe. And I think that as governments, we've lost the ability to think long term. So if governments behaved the way we do now, we would never have built a national railroad. So having that vision of something and then seeing it come through. And if you look at what happened in Ontario, where we had a government that had closed the coal-fired plants, taken a number of initiatives, rebates for electric cars, and then governments change, which they do, that's democracy and that's our government. But then all that work got lost. And so it makes it really challenging for people in government when you're trying to take that longer vision and then things change. And I know it's really frustrating for activists and Canadians who are advocating on an issue like climate change. When government changes and then all the good work that has been done just gets wiped away. So I mean, when it comes to public opinion, I think it's important that those voices are loud and clear all the time, regardless who is in government, because I do think public opinion is able to create change, even if it's not a government that's supportive. And a good example of that is Highway 413. I'm probably taking too long here, Luca, but Highway 413 that was to go through the Greenbelt. A number of people have been very vocal, and sometimes the first solution that you want doesn't work, so you keep fighting and find a different way. And just yesterday, the environment minister said that would be subject to a federal environmental assessment. So the little red-headed woodpecker may just be the one that stops a highway from being built. So thanks, Luca. And thanks, Zoe.
Great answer, Pam. And don't worry, we have a bunch of time. We're way ahead of schedule. So next we will go to Lorraine and Carole. I'll give you both a chance to answer the general question, then you'll each be asked a different question. So your general question is, what do you think in your life has formed your perspective on climate?
I guess I'll go ahead if that's okay. So when I was a child in the dark ages, for all of you, I grew up in Montreal, and we didn't have computers and iPads and all the rest of that. And my mother would just send us out at the beginning of the day and say, come back when it's dark and time for supper. So my playtime was usually doing something outdoors, playing in fields, in creeks, in forests, in woods. I got to know little critters, spiders, caterpillars, up close and personal, and really developed my love for birds and all things in nature. The second part of that, I think, was also listening just a couple of years ago to Greta and her emotional speech, where she claimed that, you know, we had stolen her dreams and her childhood. And yes, we have. And my third focus on the climate comes from my great grandsons, Grayson and Aiden. And it's for them that I'm really working as hard as I can to improve the climate and leave them a livable planet. Over to you, Carole.
Well, I have a similar background, maybe because we're the same age. She's younger, but I grew up, big family, 9 children, and we were in the country, rural area. Really, the outdoors became.
Carole, you're cutting in and out a bit.
And oh dear.
Carole,
we have a microwave that sometimes kicks me off.
Okay, yeah, because you were freezing up on us.
Would you like to try answering the question again?
Sorry. Am I okay?
You're okay now.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, playing outside. And then I became a high school biology teacher. And then I really became a grandmother. And all of a sudden, all the what I wanted for my life, all of a sudden I was focused on her life, my granddaughter's life, and thinking what's there for the future. And that really made me started to look at the kind of life we were living, a life of privilege. And what was this life of privilege? It was a constant consumerism. And I had to reassess where I was at. And so that's how it brought me to climate, my privilege and my granddaughter.
Great, thank you so much for that very awesome answer. You were a little bit choppy, but I think we were able to understand what you were saying. So now I'll pass it off to Eliza to ask both of you some of your specific questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eliza. Thank you for being here today. Hi. So I'm going to be asking each one of you guys a question, and I'm going to start with Miss Lorraine Green. So your question is, how much do you think declaring climate emergencies in local regions helps push an agenda of pursuing climate advocacy efforts?
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Elisa. Well, it was very important for GASP a few years ago in 2019 that all the municipalities in Halton declare a climate emergency. We really pushed, attended municipal council hearings, and really got on our councillors in the various municipalities to push the mayors to vote for climate emergency. And they did. And we attended all of the meetings where climate emergencies were declared in each of our municipalities, as well as the region of Halton. It was important for us because it raised awareness of the climate crisis within Halton area. We were very, very optimistic when climate emergencies were declared in each of the municipalities, because we felt that this would now mean that our municipalities would make their decisions through a climate lens. They would really focus on doing things differently. And they would bring these decisions to the citizens of our municipalities. But then we have a new government and everything changed. we are no longer looking at things through this climate lens. It's now a market-driven lens. And that makes a big, big difference to how climate issues are dealt with. So I'll leave it there and thank you for the question.
Thank you for the amazing answer. And so this next question is for Ms. Carole Holmes. What aspects and or effects of climate change are the most overlooked by the public, and why do you think so?
I think that's a really tough question, but for me, what I feel is that there is a very shallow understanding of climate among general public. You know, they go for the climate emergency. They don't see how it affects them personally. We're not in an area where we have, you know, flooding and fires that's on our back door. And so you get the feeling that it's something that's going to happen. People kind of go, yes. But when you say it's 1.5 degrees that we're worried about, they go, duh, that doesn't seem like very much. So I think one of the things that has really bothered us is that the absolute need for serious publication, public education for everyone, because people do not understand it. I once spoke to a counselor and I said, you know, probably because we're one of the wealthiest areas, Halton, even Oakville may be one of the wealthiest places in the world, it makes us have a huge carbon footprint. And this person said, what the heck are you talking about? What do you mean, Oakville? Could it be Oakville that's the worst? And I said, well, yes, because we're wealthy. And she said, well, what does that have to do with it? You see, the connection isn't there. The connection isn't there. You know, I had to say, well, do you have 2 cars? Do you have a cottage? You know, do you drive an electric car? You know, all of these different questions. I said, well, it's wealthy people that have a huge carbon footprint. And people don't understand that. You know, they will buy a bamboo toothbrush. That's not to say anything about a bamboo toothbrush. It's very important to have that. But it's much more the way we live, the rampant consumerism and the convenience. It's greed. It's greed. We all want a big house. I wanted a big house. I wanted a big yard. I had 2 cars. Yeah, all of those things are part of it. But it doesn't mean that what's in the future is bad. I think it's going to be much better in the future. But back to what you're saying about people don't feel it and they don't know about it. And there needs to be a wonderful public education. That's why you kids are way ahead of your parents, way ahead of your parents. And that's why my granddaughter, Calliope, 14 years old, said, Mammy, because of your greed, the way you lived, you haven't worried about me for the future. That's a sort of an answer.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. So now we're going to go back up and go to the second general question, then we'll go back down and do the second questions. And we're way ahead of schedule, so don't feel rushed. Feel free to give a long answer because we have a bunch of time. So we'll start back up at the top. The second question will be, are there any barriers that the government has knowingly or unknowingly put in place that prevent you from changing to environmentally friendly alternatives? And Ms. Bodo, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Luca. Another great question, of course. So I did mention very briefly earlier, but a study from, I think, 2014, but I'm pretty sure things are still the same. It showed that in Ontario, transportation was responsible for the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. And of this sector, I believe half, or if not maybe slightly more than half, of these emissions were from passenger road vehicles. So in my mind, I think, you know, Carole really hit the nail on the head with this idea of greed and people driving to and from work, even if they work in downtown Toronto from Oakville or Burlington, because it's convenient. But for somebody like myself, where potentially cost is more of a driver, At the present moment, we see that many people that previously lived and worked in the downtown core of Toronto, a lot of those people have sold their homes and they've moved out to the suburbs here in Oakville, Burlington. Now, if and when they go back to working in the downtown core on a regular basis, are these people going to take the GO train or any other kind of public transit? For myself, I mentioned the idea of cost. I know from Aldershot Station, which is right near my house, to Union, it's $26 return trip. Now, driving a small vehicle, that cost could easily be compared with sharing, the cost of a tank of gas with my partner. So really, to summarize, I think that the government could help incentivize the use of public transit to help reduce these share of greenhouse gas emissions from transportation.
Thank you. That's a great answer. So now we'll move on to Matej, who will give you your second specific question.
So, Ms. Bodo, this is the second question. What new technologies and innovations do you think are most promising in the fight against climate change?
Thank you, Matej. Oh, I hope I don't go off on too much of a tangent with this one, but you said we have time, right, Luca? Okay, so we know scientifically that the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide is the most abundant and the most rapidly rising, but we should also keep in mind that methane is 30 times more harmful than carbon dioxide. So addressing both of these greenhouse gases is going to really be the key. So for carbon dioxide, I'll start with that one. There is a lot of work that's being done on both slowing emissions, so preventing the increasing CO2, or carbon capture technologies, which means they're removing the carbon dioxide after it's already been emitted. And so at the present moment, there are increasingly new technologies in favor of course, preventing carbon dioxide. So things like electric vehicles and renewable energy sources, high efficiency appliances, you name it. So the technology is there. We just really have to find better ways, I think, to make it accessible. And of course, cost effective for people to be able to afford. And the other side of things, the carbon capture technologies, these things have actually been around since the 1970s, which I had no idea until I did a little bit of research. But they're faced with numerous other challenges, like if we're taking carbon out of the atmosphere, where do we store it? And if we store it deep underground, does it get pressurized and then have adverse effects like geologically? Those are things that scientists haven't quite figured out just yet. But what's interesting, I think, on this side of things is we have billionaires like Elon Musk who put out a tweet offering $100 million to the scientist or a startup company that came up with the best environmental and climate sequestration type of technology. So I think the funding hopefully will be there if we get some really good ideas. And then for methane, I have a couple really cool technologies I want to share, or initiatives, but basically the argument is revolved around sort of the replacement of beef and other high emissions foods in our diet. So I think these are really starting to gain some traction. We're seeing a lot of vegan alternatives, so like Beyond Meat, lots of vegan dairy products now. And there are also more innovative solutions that are being developed. So one of these includes the replacement of beef with a substitute that's made from insects, which may sound kind of gross, but harvesting insects for things like protein, they don't release methane like cows do, and they also provide key nutrients like iron and protein that are similar to beef. So those are my innovative solutions. I hope everybody can, if you're interested in them, do a little bit more research. It's kind of a fun read.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting, though. One about the insects is really interesting. I think I'll have to look into that. So that's awesome. So now I'll move on to Miss Wyne. So your second general question is, are there any barriers that the government has knowingly or unknowingly put in place that prevents you from changing to environmentally friendly alternatives?
Thank you so much, Luca. So for myself personally, I'm waiting for the ban on single-use plastics to come into effect at the grocery stores, because the ones I have been going to are still using plastic bags. And I believe the stats are that up to 15 billion plastic bags are used every year. And I think this is a really important step that the federal government has taken. I think once this ban comes into effect, it'll force consumers to bring in their reusable bags, or force grocery stores to offer paper bags, which can then be recycled and have a more positive impact on the environment. Thank you.
Great answer. We'll now move on to Mariana to give you your second specific question.
As an activist and community advocate, do you feel that activists are being heard by the leaders of our community in this current situation?
Thank you so much, Mariana. In regards to climate, I would have to say yes and no to this question respectfully. There are many local issues being advocated for by many local groups, and I'm sure our leaders have many perspectives to consider on each issue. However, on one end, I'm going to talk about Milton. Issues like the CN intermodal issue, local activist voices, I believe, were consulted over numerous years and by various leadership. However, I believe specifically the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, failed to listen to advocates about the environmental deterioration and negative health impacts it'll have on our residents here in Milton. It's unfortunate that when profits come into the matter, the environment gets impacted negatively, which is a common theme in climate activism, I believe. I would like to say that climate issues aside, I do believe most leaders in our community are consulting community advocates on various issues of importance, ensuring a community-informed approach is taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Terrific answer. We'll now move on to Pam Damoff. So your second general question is, are there any barriers that the government has knowingly or unknowingly put in place that prevent you from changing to environmentally friendly alternatives?
Thanks, Luca. And, you know, I wanted to say something first. Carole mentioned, you know, educating people, and we don't have flooding and fires here, but we just had flooding in Burlington not all that long ago, and people forget about that, and they think, oh well, you know, it was a one-time thing. But you look at flooding that has happened. We're right on Lake Ontario, down at Coronation Park, for example, and the cost, the financial cost to municipalities and to us to deal with that. And whenever I hear people say that, you know, well, climate change is too expensive, or doing something about climate change is too expensive, it's too expensive not to do something. We don't take those costs into effect. But in answer to your question, Luca, yes, absolutely, there are barriers. And I think one of the things is determining what those barriers are. And, you know, one of those in your question, it said unknowingly. I think we need to make sure that scientists and policy experts make sure that unknown barriers become known. And I would use the example, because you can't advocate and we can't act on a barrier that we don't know about. So think about the GO train, and Alanna mentioned that earlier, GO Transit. Now, of course, the ridership is down a lot right now. But in 2018, they had an annual ridership of 71 million people. What if those 71 million people chose to drive rather than using public transit? And what kind of impact would that have on our environment? So once we know something's a barrier, then we need government to act on it. And I would give the example of the provincial government in Ontario shutting down the coal-fired plants. You know, Luca, you're probably too young to remember this, but we had smog days every summer. And when those coal plants were shut down, those ended. People with asthma were finally able to breathe. The ban on single-use plastics. I have noticed that the use of single-use plastics has gone up since the pandemic started. So a number of strides that we had made even without the government taking action, but a number of strides. I mean, that's a barrier right there. Grocery stores said, don't bring in your reusable bags. We want to use, I always, if I went to, and I don't do it very often, but if I did go to a Starbucks or a Tim Hortons or a coffee shop, I brought my own coffee cup. Well, they won't refill them anymore. So those are the kind of barriers that we've seen just in the last year. But you know, governments, we brought in a rebate for electric cars. That's something to try, you know, that's, we've heard that cost is a barrier. And so we brought in a rebate to try and reduce that cost. I've been trying to get a rebate for electric bikes too, and I haven't been successful yet, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. But another barrier can be physical infrastructure. So how many of you or people on this, at this meeting would feel comfortable riding their bike from Oakville to Burlington on Highway 5? You know, there's a few brave souls that I see doing it, but not very many. But I will ride my bike to go from where I am in Oakville over to Pav's Ward 7, because I can do it by not taking, well, I can actually take Dundas Street because there's an off-road multi-use trail, or I can go south on 4th Line. I can, you know, there's places. So if the physical infrastructure is there, then you can actually change people's behavior. But, you know, I was just so thrilled to finally get $400 million in a fund dedicated for, it's called active transportation infrastructure, so cycling and walking, so that but municipalities still have to apply for it. So, you know, you can make the money available, but the barrier can be whether or not there's the infrastructure to allow you to do it. Alanna mentioned the cost of public transit. The other thing is the convenience. So we have GO Train, but how many people drive their cars to get to the train? And so that last, they call it the last mile. How do we get people out of their cars for the entire trip? Well, you need to make it convenient for them. And Oakville has gotten much better on transit, I have to say, but Burlington, not as much. Milton, Milton barely has a transit system, right? But you know, if you have convenient transit that gets you to the GO Train so that you don't have to think about when the bus is coming, then people will use it. When it only runs every hour, that's a barrier. People are busy, they've got families to get home to, they've already spent 45 minutes on a GO Train coming from Toronto, unless they have to, and then it comes down to how much money people have. People who can't afford the car or afford 2 cars end up taking public transit and end up, I hear from so many students who do rely on public transit, how it will take them an hour each way to get to their part-time job because they're taking transit and it's just not convenient. So, I mean, I think we do put barriers up, but it's important to talk about them. Another barrier we have, quite frankly, in Canada is our geography and the size of our country. It's cold in the winter. As an MP, I had to travel back and forth between Ottawa and my riding, which meant most of the time flying, mostly because of the amount of time it takes to take the train. And I would take VIA, but it was a good 6-hour trip. I didn't always have time on a short weekend home to dedicate that time to taking the train. So investments in high-speed rail would mean that more people could turn to an alternative in transportation. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Zoe, who will ask your second specific question.
Ms. Damoff, do you feel the new wave of youth activists and protesters have influenced your policymaking?
Do you want me to just say yes? That's an easy one. You know what? Absolutely. And you know, when I talk to young people, I have always said that you have such a strong voice. And I'm so happy to see young people using that voice. I remember when I was on Oakville Council and there was debate about whether or not to build at Sawwet Golf Course. And I can remember a group of grade 7 students coming from West Oak Public School to do their presentation. I can't tell you who else did a presentation, although there were many, but I remember those grade 7 students who came, and because they were younger and they were powerful. I'm sure Pav can speak to this. When she has council meetings, young people, when they come out and speak, you remember them. And I could, you see the power that young people have had on moving the conversation around climate change and the environment. And it's been incredibly powerful. And I think sometimes you don't recognize just how powerful your voice is, because you are listened to. And it changes the conversation. I always use the example, and I will again tonight. Terry Fox was a young man and changed the world. And 40 years later, his legacy is still raising money for cancer research. But he was 18 years old when he was diagnosed with cancer. He was a young man, and he single-handedly changed the conversation around cancer research, around people living with disabilities. One person did, right? One young person, because I truly believe young people don't see, as you get older, you start saying, well, it's not possible. It's just not possible. Young people say, you don't think that way. Sometimes that can be dangerous, because it means you walk into the middle of the street to cross the street and you don't see the cars coming, but you don't see that things are impossible. So you dream big. And I think that's what we need is young people who dream big and push us in developing policy and push us as communities to go further and recognize how important that voice is.
Great. That was an awesome answer. Thank you very much. I will say just super quick that the link to the Google form has been put in the chat, so you can go there to submit your Q&A questions if you have any, and then those will be asked shortly. So now we will go on to Ms. Green and Ms. Holmes. Your first general question, I think we'll go Ms. Green and then Ms. Holmes, is are there any barriers that government has knowingly or unknowingly put in place that prevents you from changing to environmentally friendly alternatives?
Thank you, Luca. I'm going to break this down into both provincial governments and federal governments. One of the barriers that GASP has been pushing up against just recently is all the latest edicts coming from our provincial government that affect the environment, the dissolution of all the conservation authorities. And one of the major things we've been working on is trying to get municipalities to look at their official plans in a different light. And the biggest barrier that we see right now is sprawl. Sprawl throughout our municipalities is a major issue, and it's overlooked by so many people. It's a big threat to the sustainability in our municipalities. We continue to build single family homes, and we destroy our wetland and our farmland. We're so fortunate here in Halton to have Class A farmland that not too many other areas have. And by destroying this to build single family homes on it, or to build highways, pave them over and build highways, we're jeopardizing our food security. The green belt as well. I think there was a promise from the government that they weren't going to touch the green belt, and yet day after day after day, we're fighting inroads into developers wanting to build on the green belt. We just stopped one in Pickering for a big Amazon warehouse, but it's always these constant barriers that we're fighting against. Sometimes it really kind of gets you down, but you just keep going. So that's one of the barriers I feel we have with the municipalities. The second one is from a federal standpoint. And while there is new legislation hopefully coming in with some teeth in it, we hope. We feel that the barriers there are, I feel anyways, that there's not enough things being mandated. It's very fine to say we're going to give you subsidies to buy an electric vehicle, but when are we going to stop producing electric vehicles? We should have a time frame for that. We should say by 2030, nowhere in Canada will there be produced a regular fossil fuel car. It will all be electric vehicles. The same with making it mandatory that all new buildings be green buildings, only using green materials. Maybe that deadline should be by 2025. This is what must be done. No more kind of pussyfooting around. We need these hard, firm targets. So those are the barriers that I see, and I'm sure Carole has some others.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest barrier we have in Canada is we are totally addicted, and we totally believe that we have to keep the oil and gas business going. You know, the burning of fossil fuels is one of the, well, we have to stop. And it's not about stopping right now, but it is about saying no more money for it, no more subsidies. Our banks, all 5 banks are considered part of the dirty dozen. These banks are banks that are funding fossil fuels. Our insurance companies are funding the banks who are funding these big projects. And I think Canadian, again, it comes back to education. I think Canadians feel that Canada can't make it. We're not ready. We're not ready to give up. And so we still have pipelines, and we are building more pipelines, and we are giving subsidies. We have to, and it should happen tomorrow, to say, you know, we need to start to address the fact that this oil has and gas, it has to stay in the ground, and we have to start divesting. And I know it's a big job, and I know Canada can do it. We have to do it in a just transition. We have to make sure that the workers in the oil and gas there's able to transition into others, use their skills in other ways. But we need to take that stand. And so we've been working very hard on an Accountability Act, which is C12, Bill C12, to strengthen it, to have tough targets. You know, people say there's so many promises, very unfair to every government. We say they make all these promises and they don't deliver. Well, by having an Accountability Act in climate, you know, we will be able to measure and people will be accountable. But what we discovered in the Act, it doesn't keep you and I and our government today accountable. It's going to be way off and 9 years away from us before the first accountability target has to happen. We have to start now. We can't have accountability for the next government. It might not be the present government. Things can change. And so I think that we have to have an Accountability Act with tough targets and earlier targets to be able to measure, because we should be measuring every year, really, and not waiting till 2030. So that's my thing, and it's really big. And I think Canadians can't believe that we could do it, but I absolutely believe we can do it. We just have to make that line in the sand to say, slowly we have to devolve away from oil and gas.
Thank you both. Those were very passionate answers. We're now going to hand it off to Aliza, who will ask you both your final specific question.
Hello, everyone, me again. So the first question will be for Lorraine Green, and it is, what do you think that the climate for future generations will look like?
Thank you, Aliza. Great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. I think it's too difficult to predict what the future is going to look like, because we know, look at what just happened from COVID. Did any of us predict that? I mean, we had warnings, but did we really predict it? So I think your generation is doing so much right now to change things. It's GASP and my fervent hope that we can leave you with a green legacy, and that we don't leave you with a planet that's totally devastated. I hope our legacy will be one of regeneration of nature. But I think it's important that youth must speak out. You must continue to speak. You must continue to do what you're doing now, holding these types of panel discussions. You need to bring other young people along with you. You need to raise awareness. And most importantly, I think one of the things is vote for politicians who share your views on the climate emergency. Prior to the election, we met with all of the candidates running in the Halton region to find out where they stood on the climate, both in 2015 and in 2019. So these are things I think that you need to carry on and raise your views on climate emergency. Make sure that they are prepared to act, not just to give you nice platitudes, or as we call it, greenwashing. So I'm very hopeful for the future, and I'm hopeful because I see the caliber of young people that are out there today, like all of you here tonight. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for the amazing answer. Kind of piggybacking off of the question I just asked Ms. Green, Ms. Holmes, this question is for you. What can us, the future generation, do to carry on your legacy and further help the environment?
Well, I want to say, I agree with everything that Lorraine just said, incidentally, but I also don't want you to carry on the legacy that we've been leaving you at all. I think that I'm very, very concerned that if you would keep up with what we have been doing, the consumerism. I'm finding it very hard to answer that question, because you're saying keep up our legacy, because I don't, maybe I missed the question, but you're going to be developing your own legacy, and your own legacy is going to be greener. It's going to be kinder. It's going to be simpler. And we have to get across that that is probably going to be a better life than those of us that were trapped in the consumerism cycle. Buy more, you'll be happier. You'll be looking for quality, not quantity. You'll be looking for other things in life. Tabassum's comment about faith and what she was getting from her faith and how she applied it to the climate, we're all going to have to do that in our own way, or whatever spiritual way. So I see a better future. I don't want you to continue what you're doing. So I don't want that. I want you to look for a new way. Yes, you will continue fighting for climate. We're already there. It's not as if it's going to be solved. But you know what? When you act, you start to feel better. You start to lose that sense of what can we do? It's so big, it's so huge, who am I? As soon as you start to act, you start to feel like you're part of the solution. So I'm all for a positive future and building your own legacy. And it'll be a much kinder, lovelier, greener legacy than we have left you. I don't know, maybe I didn't answer it.
I think that was a great answer, very passionate. Thank you so much. So we're now going to move on to the Q&A part of the panel, which is great. So the Q&A and extra questions. We have a lot of time, which is awesome. So our first Q&A question will go to Pam Damoff. So there are over 800,000 Canadians employed directly and indirectly in the oil, gas/energy sector. When we switch over to green energy sources, how will we ensure that these Canadians will not be left behind?
Thanks, Luca. And I'm looking for my numbers here because I did a little bit of research on it. Carole talked about how we need to move away from oil and gas. And I think there's a feeling, and I certainly get it working in Parliament, that somehow moving away from oil and gas is abandoning the people who work in oil and gas, and it's not. And if you think about it, the workers in predominantly in Alberta, many of them have lost their jobs because the price of oil has gone down. It had nothing to do with a move to greener energy. Alberta oil is extremely expensive to get out of the ground. And so those people have lost their jobs through market forces. And the fact is that it's very uncertain in terms of prices, and Alberta oil has always been very expensive, and it's also not very clean. So that's a consideration that you have to take into account regardless of what government was in power. So one of the things that we did in the fall economic statement, and I can't seem to, oh, there it is that we put $1.7 billion to clean up orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. So that will create 5,200 jobs in Alberta alone. It's something that has been called for. We've got to clean up these abandoned wells. So that is part of it. We need to provide the ability for people who are working in oil and gas, if they need to be retrained, to work in other industries. So putting the funding into programs that will allow, and it doesn't have to necessarily be working in green energy. It could be that someone goes from working in oil and gas and finds a completely different career as an accountant, for example. But there needs to be the opportunity. And so we put in budget 2021, we have 55 million over 3 years for a community workforce development program, which will support communities to develop local plans to identify high potential growth organizations and collect those employers with training providers to develop training and work placements so that people can upskill and reskill. As we come out of COVID and the pandemic, we're putting budget 2021 also has $250 million over 3 years to innovation, science, and economic development for an initiative to scale up proven industry-led third-party developed approaches to upskill and redeploy workers. So looking at growing industries and making sure that we can give people the opportunity to retrain. I think we need to stop saying that people can only work in oil and gas and that we're fighting the people. It has nothing to do with the people. A transition to green energy is not an attack on people who work in oil and gas. It's getting people to think differently about the environment. We won't make that transition tomorrow either. The fact is that people are still going to need oil and gas. We don't have the capacity to change tomorrow, but we do need to make that change, and we need to all be working together to make that change. And even industry is seeing it. I mean, Carole mentioned getting away from fossil fuel vehicles. Ford of Canada is moving to build electric vehicles in Oakville. They see the future. They see the future is not in fossil fuel vehicles. And so they're transitioning that entire plant to build electric vehicles. That's the kind of transition that we need. And 10 years from now, people will look back and say, okay, well, we were able to preserve those jobs for those auto workers because they're now making electric vehicles. So it is possible to transition, and industry has to be part of that solution. And they want to be, because a lot of times industry starts to see where the money is going to come from, and they know that they have to make that move. And they see that's where public opinion and advocates can make a big difference in pushing industry. Carole and Lorraine and GASP have been really vocal about pushing the banks and speaking up about where banks are investing. So There's a few other programs that we put money into, Luca, and I know that's an issue that you've been quite concerned about because you've asked me about it before. But I think we need to be clear that a transition to green energy is not an attack on the people who work in the oil and gas industry.
Thank you so much. Great answer. That's really great. So now we're going to move on to Ms. Bodo. One question that was asked in the Q&A form is, how has the ongoing pandemic affected the climate crisis? Has it had an overall positive or negative effect?
That's a great question to whoever asked that. And that's also something that we're really, really interested in terms of our research here. We have a tower, we actually have a series of 4 towers in just outside Turkey Point. So it's not quite in Halton, but it can still be representative of Southern Ontario. And we actually measure carbon dioxide directly at a very high frequency level. So we're able to see changes all the way back. We have long-term records to, I think, 2003. And one thing that we have noticed, I'm particularly interested in looking over the past, say, 14 months, so since March of 2020, until now, if we saw a decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide when the shutdowns happened. And I will say we've seen a slight increase in carbon monoxide, which is representative of other measurements taken in the world, but nothing too alarming. So in terms of the increase in carbon monoxide, it's nothing to be concerned about. We did not see a significant decrease in carbon dioxide from the lockdowns. This is preliminary results from our tower. Nothing's been published yet, but overall, we did not see a great change. However, that being said, there are lots of places elsewhere in the world that have maybe not noticed a decrease in atmospheric carbon yet, but they have noticed healthier areas of the environment. So cleaner water and other areas. But one thing I will note that many people have probably noticed is the amount of garbage and trash that unfortunately the pandemic has led to, and that's going to take some time to rebound from, and the increase in plastics and stuff. So that's mainly my biggest concern is with all the extra consumables.
Great, thank you so much. That was a great answer. We'll now move on to Ms. Wyne. One of the questions submitted through the Q&A form was, whose voices would you like to hear more of in discussions surrounding climate change?
That's a great question. I'd actually like to hear more from the youth on this council, and specifically in terms of the Muslim advisory. I'd like to hear from more Muslim youth speak up about this issue, because so far this is the first discussion I've been a part of, but this has got me thinking that I would like to have a youth group for our organization and have them talk about climate change as one of the issues of importance. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll now move on to Ms. Green, Ms. Holmes. You guys got a few questions, so I think I'll let Ms. Green, you can go first, and this is the question that you can answer is, what can we as students in affluent communities do to help fight climate change?
Thank you, Luca. I think you are already doing so much. GASP has been associated with Fridays for the Future. And we have met so many wonderful students at all of the Fridays for Future strikes that we've been out to. I think continue doing what you're doing, raise your voices, contact as many people as you can in government, in the business world, get them on board with your ideas around climate change. I think keep going forward with your beliefs. You believe strongly in a green planet. Don't get taken off that track. Keep going straight ahead. And I really admire all that you are doing. And I think you're on the right track. So, and we at GAS, us grandmothers, we want to work with you. We want to be there alongside of you. So, you know, if you ever need to pick our brains for strategies, we've been around a long time as feminists and activists, and so we are very willing to help you in whatever direction you want to go with. And we love working with the youth in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now move to Ms. Holmes. Ms. Green, I think you need to mute yourself because I can hear myself coming across as an echo.
Okay.
Thank you. So Ms. Holmes, your question is, how do you think us as youth should deal with politicians who ignore or disrespect our ideas and hopes for our future climate?
Well, I think you just got to keep talking, and you've got to be polite and knowledgeable. Do your homework. That's very important, but you don't have to know everything. Sometimes you just have to be a concerned citizen, and that's a very important voice. You don't have to be a scientist. So I think that every one of you can make some changes, and it's just talking to other people and getting together as a group. Again, if you can get other people, like Lorraine said, we've been on all the Fridays walks, the Greta call out for the walks. And we knew that a lot of young people would look at us and say, you're part of that generation. Boomer, okay, boomer. Do you remember that term, okay, boomer? Well, we just found that if we told the truth, if we just said, yes, you're right, we were embraced. We couldn't believe how welcoming youth were on the walks. They'd say, Grandma, I'm going to bring my grandma on the walk. So bring your grandmas. You'd be surprised what your grandmas think about and how supportive they are. So I think it's about collaboration. And I want to say something about collaboration and COVID. I know it's not my question, but you know, there was something really great about the beginning of COVID that happened in this country. Everybody got together. I don't know if you remember, but federal politicians, provincial politicians, they got together. They agreed to address it together. They said, we'll have to spend what it takes, and they did. That just shows that for a major issue that the whole world is impacted, all of our entire country, that by collaboration, working together, you can make a change and you can make it happen. And Canada can make it happen, and it'll be the youth's voices, because your voice, it's not going to be very long before you're adults. And I'm saying, keep talking and don't forget your grandparents, because we're on board. We care about your future. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, I just say, I keep losing track of the questions because I'm so passionate about youth. I'm just so passionate about you. But I don't think it should be all up to you. I think it should be all of us together. That's all.
Definitely. And don't worry about time. We're right on schedule. So that's perfect. So now we will move into the final summative questions. So I'll pass it off to Aliza, and I will say that we are on schedule, so take as much time as you need. Don't feel rushed.
Hi, everyone, me again. So I'm going to be asking this summative question, and I'll start with Alanna. So the summative question is, did you learn anything from today? Anyone else on the panel? Sorry. Did you learn anything today from anyone else on the panel, and how did that change your perspective moving forward?
Thank you, Lisa. I learned so much today. I love learning. Learning's my favorite thing, so I'm so happy to be here. And also, I'm really happy to connect with Pam and the other groups that are more involved with policy, because that's not always the side that I get to be exposed to. I'm always stuck in the lab working on the science, and it's easy to forget why we do the science. It's to help shape and inform policy. So I have learned so much. And one thing I'm really going to take going forward is at McMaster, we have, and I teach at McMaster, and many of our students practice the Islam faith. And I am so blown away by knowing how their faith can help shape beliefs and actions around climate. So going forward, I'm going to become more involved working with the McMaster Muslim Students Association and see if we can make some connections there.
That was an amazing answer. Thank you so much. So the same question will be asked to Tabassum Wyne, and I'll just repeat the question. Did you learn anything today from anyone else on the panel, and how has this changed your perspective moving forward?
Thank you, Elisa. Yes, I think climate advocacy is a responsibility of everyone, and I've learned a lot from the insight and perspective shared here today by Alanna, Lorraine, and Carole. I think going forward, for our organization, we're going to be focusing on public education. I think Carole and Lorraine emphasized that, and I think it's really important that we use public education for our own organization and utilize that, because climate change is very important, and it's our individual responsibilities that collective action can, change can happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the answer. And now it'll go off to Pam. I'll just repeat the question again. Did you learn anything today from anyone else on the panel? And how has this changed your perspective moving forward?
Well, I have to say, Elisa, when you come on to ask a question, I think you make all of us smile just with the way you say hello. It's wonderful. Yeah, for sure. I mean, GASP are such incredible women and incredible advocates, and I'm in awe of the work that they continue to do. I think the thing that has sort of struck me, and Carole brought it up during COVID, and how things have changed, and what Tabassum was talking about with her faith and spirituality, and how important caring for the earth is to her because of her faith. And I was thinking, one of the things I heard during the pandemic from First Nations communities was how they went back to the land as a way of dealing with overcrowding in homes and with the pandemic, but they found that it was good for their mental health, and it's something that they're going to incorporate more into their way of life. And when Lorraine and Carole were talking about being kids and getting outside, I think we've gotten away from the simpler things, and ensuring that kids do play in the earth and do play in go for walks in the woods and listen to the birds singing, and all of those things, that it's much harder, I think, to destroy the environment that we live in when we have a connection to it. And we've lost that connection. Life has gotten so fast, and I just hope that over the course of the last year, that maybe that slowing down piece of life will continue, and we can take those lessons of the connection to the earth and the importance of truly living and feeling that connection. I just, on the Highway 413, if there's anything that's going to stop it, it's going to be, and I'm just going to tell you the 3 species, because there's a little dragonfly. It's the western chorus frog, the red-headed woodpecker, and the rapids clubtail, which is a dragonfly. Can you imagine those 3 species at risk being the ones that can stop a highway from being built? Like, just think about that. But it's because of that connection. If we actually have a connection to the birds and to the fish and to the water, I think it makes a big difference. So I think that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. I agree with every single word you just said. And now to the two amazing members of GASP. Did you learn anything today from anyone else on the panel, and how has this changed your perspective moving forward?
Thank you, Lisa. Wow. Did I learn anything today? I'm overwhelmed by the caliber of the panelists tonight. You are all totally amazing, and I'm humbled to be on the same panel with all of you this evening. My takeaway, I guess, is, and I just wanted to piggyback on something that Pam said. Yes, Highway 413 has been stopped by this species of dragonflies, but the Trans-Canada Pipeline has also been stopped by a hummingbird. So yay for nature. I just wanted to add that. Sorry, Pam. I think tonight showed that we all come from various backgrounds. We're all involved in various aspects of climate change, different faiths, different beliefs. And look at this panel. We've all been able to talk to each other politely, collaboratively. We've listened to each other. We've learned from each other. This is how we should be talking all the time. This is how our governments should be operating, with real collaboration. Put partisanship aside, like let's work together. We need to collaborate more. We would get so much more done. So that's really my takeaway is I'm so thrilled to have been part of this and to have met all of you here this evening and enjoyed every minute of it. And I look forward to us getting together for more opportunities like this. So thank you again to the Youth Council for arranging this. Thank you so much.
I don't think I can add much more. I do want to say I've learned a lot. The other perspectives beyond GASP, Pam has got to be one of the most open politicians that I have ever met, and I have met many, many over the years. She listens, she takes your ideas, and she carries them on. We are very, very blessed to have Pam in Halton. I know you didn't expect me to do that, Pam, but I just want to say for the young people that are listening, Pam is pretty special when it comes to listening to her constituents. And I want to say, lead with science. I absolutely believe in science. We have to have more people believing in science. I just did one little example of negotiating. People feel you can kind of negotiate with science. Have you heard people negotiating around COVID? We'll just stay a little open a little bit longer. Well, we'll just open for 2. Well, let's just go for 3 more days. You know, you can't negotiate with science. And you certainly can't can negotiate with COVID. You can see the results of negotiation. You definitely cannot negotiate with climate. Right, Alanna? and for Tabassum, you really brought it back to me about the power of the faith communities in climate, and they could be so powerful, and they are. If we go back to the roots of all the religions, it's not always about domination. It's about collaboration and working and living with and connections. So I've learned lots from the panel. But the best thing for me is that there's so much potential for intergenerational climate action. That means young people and us oldies who care about the young people. That's it.
Thank you so much for the answers, everyone. I loved everyone's answers. So we have one more summative question, and that is, what advice would you tell future climate leaders or youth leaders in general to continue moving forward? And I'm going to bring it to Alanna to answer first.
Thank you. This sounds cliche, but just really follow your heart and follow your passion and go with your strengths. Carole mentioned that you don't have to be a scientist to be involved with making a difference. And I know in grade 9, 10, 11, 12, you might start thinking about what you want to do after high school, whether it's college or university, or just jump right into an apprenticeship or into the job market. There are ways in every industry and every sector that you choose, there are ways to be involved, and there are ways to follow your passions. And even just like for something like fine arts, I've noticed in science, there's a lot of scientists working with fine artists to convey scientific information in many different ways. So if you're not great at science, don't give up. Just follow your passion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. The next person who will be answering is Tabassum Wyne, and I'll just repeat the question. What advice would you tell future climate leaders or youth leaders in general to continue moving forward?
Thank you, Elisa. I would say keep educating your elders and your loved ones and the people that you live with, because I think change can happen with a small group of people. So I think if your family is educated, that will have a huge impact on your community. Change happens through conversations, which then leads to action. I believe my niece invited me here today to start the climate conversation with me, and I'm hopeful going forward through collaborative efforts with the youth, the local groups here such as GAF and Alanna. Thank you so much.
Just to be clear, I am the niece. Thank you for the answer, Tabassum. And now it'll be going off to Pam, and I'll repeat the question again. What advice would you tell future climate leaders or youth leaders in general, such as the Youth Council, to continue moving forward?
What everyone else said, but I would say don't give up. It can sometimes feel like you're not getting anywhere. Look at making the small changes and the big changes, and when you hit that roadblock, it can be really discouraging, and it's okay to get frustrated, and it's okay to get angry, and it's okay to cry, but then just pick yourself up and start again, because you really can make a difference. And just don't give up, and believe in yourself. And when you're doing, as Carole said, when you're passionate about something and you follow your passion, you can't do wrong. So and I think Carole was talking about do your research. Do your research, know the science, especially on this issue, know the science, be able to go out and speak intelligently about it when people throw things at you, and just keep moving forward, always be moving forward, and keep pushing governments, and keep pushing people like me, but keep pushing everyone that you know to, and invite your aunt to a climate change panel to get her to move. That's great, Eliza. But any way that you can to sort of move the message along. But yeah, don't give up.
Thank you, Pam. So the question is, what advice would you tell future climate leaders to continue moving forward? And I'm going to pass it on to Lorraine Green and Carole Holmes.
Thank you, Elisa. I agree, of course, with everything that the other panelists said before me. I would just like to add that you as one person can make a difference. I think we all sometimes look at these problems and we go, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. I'm just one person. But one person and one person and one person adds up to many persons. And in total, you do make a difference. I'm always reminded of the story of the little hummingbird who was trying to put out a fire. And he would run to the lake, he would take a beak of water and he'd run back and drop it on the fire. And he kept doing this back and forth, till finally one of the other animals in the forest said, what are you doing? Like, this is silly. And he said, I'm doing what I can when I can. And that would be my advice to all of you. And also find a group of like-minded people, and they give you energy. They support you. When things get you down, you have this group that you can go to and say, oh my God, not another day of this. And you get through it. So each of you are making a great difference and continue doing that. Thank you.
Well, I don't have, I don't think I can add anything more to what has been said. I think that I do want to say, you know, people can lead in all sorts of ways, and people have many, many gifts. And I grew up where in my family, my mom would say, we have many gifts, we have many skills. And for those of us who are privileged, we owe back to society. We have a call to go back to help in society. And all of you already have that call, or you wouldn't be on this Zoom call. You have that call. So that means that you owe a little bit. And you know what? It's fun. It's fun to go beyond yourself and to work at things beyond yourself. And I want to say one silly little thing. Don't give up on politics. Don't give up on politicians. It would be great if a few of you would run for politics, because I think that you could really make a difference if you use that route. You can make the difference in a lot of ways, but politics is a way of you know, being where the decisions are made, and we need great climate activists in there. So that's it. Don't give up on politics.
Thank you so much, everyone, for answering the questions. I'm going to be passing on to Luca to conclude. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Eliza. What terrific timing. We are exactly on schedule, which is awesome. I want to first off say that thank you to all the panelists. You're all doing such tremendous work. Thank you for coming. Alanna, you're on the front lines of this fight. You're right there in the action, helping to save our environment. So thank you. Ms. Green, Ms. Wyne, and Ms. Holmes, the amazing activist work you're doing. It's just incredible to see. It's very inspiring. And of course, Pam, her great work in the Parliament. I know if anyone's been following along, she's been doing a lot of great stuff. I know I've recently been watching the live streams, the question period and the member statements and all the debates. It's really great to see her fighting for our riding and for the climate, which is awesome. And of course, a big thanks to the Youth Council for planning this awesome event. I mean, it was terrific to see how this all came together. Thank you to all the groups and all the chairs and everybody, because it was awesome. And yeah, what a great event. Hopefully that this is one of the many events that we host, and hopefully the next one will be in person.